On today's show, I'm going to admit I was wrong. Wrong about what matters in 2024 politics and how Kamala Harris's VP pick solidifies that this election is only about vibes and nothing else. Welcome to The Homeless Conservative, a show about principled politics for exhausted citizens. I am your host, Blake Fisher, and I'm a political junkie so that you don't necessarily have to be. And as mentioned, I'm a political junkie that was wrong. It's true. It's hard for me to say that sometimes. It truly is. And my wife can attest to the fact that I don't love admitting I'm wrong. I'm kind of a perfectionist. It's not a great quality, but I'm working on it right here with you. I was wrong. I thought that when it came to deciding what to talk about on this show, that political news fell into really two categories. Stuff that matters, stuff that doesn't. And I thought I could view everything through that lens and ask, okay, is this going to matter in 30 days? To decide if it was worth talking about on a show that I've tried to make for an audience who specifically doesn't want to be daily political junkies. Because so much of that is worthless. I think it adds to anxiety and all sorts of things. So the problem is politics is replacing entertainment and, in worst cases, religion sometimes. I just don't think that's healthy, and I don't want to contribute to it. And so often I'm weighing things as, is this going to matter in even 30 days? Just to give you a window into how I'm thinking about things. Is this going to matter? So for example, Kamala Harris and coconuts or brat or any of the TikTok memes going on with her, I don't think really matter. I don't think they're worth taking up the space in your brain where more important things like all of the lyrics to the Men in Black rap by Will Smith from the 90s. Because that's in my head for some reason still. If it comes on, I can sing every single word. But I don't want to contribute to that kind of noise in your head. So I would go, yeah, that's not worth knowing about. It doesn't actually matter. But some of it maybe does, because I think that there are two subcategories of things that matter and things that don't matter that I want to get to a little later in the show that I've come to the conclusion that exist. And so I'm kind of changing things a little bit. So let's talk about how all this fits into where did this change of mind come from? So smarter people than me have been calling this a vibes election for a while. And frankly, it's nerdy stuff. This is people that are looking at like detailed polling and models and history and what works and what doesn't work. And these are people like in the weeds into Washington politics and electoral politics. I like paying attention to this stuff because I kind of like it, but generally it's not something that I feel like the, normal people in this country need to pay a lot of attention to because it's fun. I like paying attention to it, but it's not necessarily something that I think let's not always pay attention to the experts. Experts are good sometimes, but sometimes they can be wrong because sometimes history doesn't prove something will happen. History would have said that Donald Trump wouldn't get the Republican nomination in 2016. History was wrong about that. History was wrong about him, and the polls were wrong, and a lot of experts were wrong about him having the potential to win in 2016. So there can be a diminishing of when experts are worth listening to. I like listening to them because I think it's valuable to have, but it's not necessarily like all the weight goes behind someone's prediction right now about what the race is going to end up like in November. People love to do this. People love to make predictions. But the truth is there's not a lot of accountability to them on if those predictions are wrong all the time. So it's fun to make predictions, but it's not something I put a lot of weight behind. It's kind of fun, but it's not something I'm going to try to do so that, oh, look at me, I was right about that thing I said would happen. Mostly because most of my predictions are not things that I would feel good about gloating about later in being right, because normally I'm fairly pessimistic on how these things will go. All of this to say, all of the experts have been calling this a vibes election. And what they mean by that is that policy and reason and past records and history, none of that matters. And it's all about feelings. And I think there's two big reasons that is bad. It's not because I think feelings are bad. I have been accused of being a little not emotionally, not emotional enough sometimes, and not reading the room well. But feelings aren't bedrock. They can change pretty quickly sometimes. And social media does a great job, specifically right now in the era that we are in right now, distorts feelings in a big way. Media distorts your feelings. I try my best not to do that. I'm going to give you my opinion. I'm going to give you some of the facts, some of the things that are actually true. But, I don't want to manipulate your feelings because I think there's plenty of that going on in media. The cable news, when they say like, this common thing that you may have in your house can kill you. Find out what it is at 9. That's using fear to get you to show up and watch at 9. Because it's, oh my God, there's something in my refrigerator that could kill me. I got to know what it is. Fear, that's an emotion. That's not a great way to get eyeballs, in my opinion. It works really, really well. I just don't want to do it. But politicians love to do this, and campaigns love to do this for obvious reasons. My problem with it is that, like I said, those feelings can change really quickly. And social media can distort them. And social media is just an accelerated version of that news example I gave a second ago. That at least was a teaser that you had to be watching TV to see. Now there can be a groundswell on TikTok that essentially changes the feeling of an entire election based on nothing but memes. So if a campaign is always filtering things on what the vibes will be, they're essentially riding a wave that they have no control over, and they will live and die by that wave. They can try to control it as much as they can, but the truth is they cannot totally control the vibes because the vibes are based on collective feelings in the electorate. And you're trying to guess that more people will feel one way than another instead of, looking at policies or compromise or coalition building. It becomes, we think that on November 5th, the vibes will be this. And so we are trying to run towards that and manipulate that in some way. But like I said, it's not really a plan. So the second reason we shouldn't trust feelings is the second reason the vibes are bad is because we should not trust our feelings all the time. Our feelings lie to us constantly. They can be really easy not just can they be distorted on things like social media or traditional media, but they can also be very easily manipulated by those things. And so let's talk about some of these vibes and what I mean by this. So the first vibe of the 2024 election cycle was that leading up to it, clearly the vibe, if you looked at any poll, and by the way, that's the best way to measure this kind of thing, is do opinion polling, like good opinion polling on people. Now, the phrasing of questions really matters in polls. There are good polls, there are bad polls, but undoubtedly it didn't matter across the board. The polls said leading into 2024 that no one liked Donald Trump and Joe Biden as the ticket. It was pretty much universally not liked. So for example, we could show this if you're watching on YouTube. If you're not, you can also watch on Spotify. I've got a graph up. I will explain what's going on. But essentially, this is from Pew. Roughly a quarter of Americans had an unfavorable opinion of both Biden and Trump. So favorable to Biden but not Trump was 34% of people polled. Favorable to Trump but not Biden was 37%. And 26% unfavorable to both of them. So that's the lead up. This is from February of 2024. So this is Donald Trump's already kind of steamrolling his way to the nomination at this point. It's pretty obvious that he's going to be the nominee. He didn't have it sealed up yet. But we'd had a couple primaries. We didn't have Super Tuesday yet. But now what's really interesting about this chart or this poll is favorable to both is 2% of the people polled. Who are these people? I've got to meet these people. They must be eternal optimists to like both Joe Biden and Donald Trump. I have not met one of these people ever. If you know one of these people, I would love to talk to them. I am so curious who they could possibly be. And so people just did not like either one of these. So the vibes going into the 2024 primary, even because this was people's opinion of Donald Trump, generally across the whole, people wanted two different candidates. They were like, we did this already once, and we don't want to do it again. They were telegraphing that for a long time. The vibe was these guys are old and we want something new when you boil it down to it. Okay. So then we get to a little further into those numbers, just because I think these are interesting numbers. When you look at the unfavorable to both, ages 18 to 29, a full 41% of them. So this would be a majority because only 26% favored Biden, 28% favored Trump, and 41%. So it was a little less when you look at the total, but you look at 18 to 29 and you look at 30 to 49, it's 30% of them, basically a third of them don't like Biden or Trump. So a giant chunk of the electorate from 18 to 49 basically are like, we don't like these old guys. And interestingly enough, if you look at the 50 to 65 plus, most of them really like one of the candidates, but they don't dislike either one of them. So the unfavorable goes all the way down to 15%. So essentially you had the young half of the population saying, we don't like either one of these guys. The old half saying, we prefer one of the two of them, but we don't dislike either one of them. I do think there's a little bit of just generational prejudice there for sure. Obviously, maybe you don't think the age thing is as big of a deal if you yourself are also old. And I think it's important to talk about this because, like, we talk about these two old guys. I don't think there's anything wrong necessarily with really any age being the president of the United States if they have the competency, cognitive functions, all that kind of stuff there. And I do think we're rolling the dice a little bit when we look at someone who Trump is 78, Biden before he stepped down, 81. We're asking him to be 86 by the time he leaves another term. You don't know what kind of rapid aging can happen. So I think most people were pretty scared of that. Maybe older Americans were scared to admit that because they're sort of also admitting that for themselves a little bit. I don't really know. But very unfavorable. And it was pretty clear that if either party chose someone other than one of those two people, they would fare so much better. And they would benefit from vibes that, hey, this person's not old and they're not Biden and they're not Trump. Of course, I am not the only person to have noticed this. There was Nikki Haley from back in February around the same time as these polls.
Americans do not want a rematch between Biden and Trump. The first party to retire its 80-year-old candidate is going to be the party that wins this election.
She was obviously right then. I think it's pretty obvious. She's getting some blowback for that now because now that she's supporting Donald Trump, there's people that are using this as sort of see, she was right. She wasn't the only one. There was lots of people that did this, but most people knew that. Republicans chose to go with Trump anyway. And by Republicans, I mean the voters in the primary decided instead of going with someone that we know could beat Biden, especially because we were telegraphing way a long time ago that, hey, Biden might get, there was this conspiracy theory for forever that Biden was going to get replaced. Of course, most of them went as far as to be like, he's going to get replaced by Michelle Obama. I think that was always ridiculous, but it was not unrealistic to think that he wouldn't be the nominee. So Republicans choose Donald Trump anyway. They stick with the guy that most of the country says, don't like him. You know, that's a problem. Because if we go back to those graphics, unfavorable to both, 26%. Unfavorable to Biden, 34%. That is 60% of the country doesn't like Trump. Biden has the same problem. 37 plus 26. It's actually even a little bit more of the country that didn't like Biden. And yet, they cruised through the nomination. So that's on us, right? Okay. But this is why I'm sort of mad at Republicans because, we could have had someone else. Like I said, Trump even was telegraphing that the Democrats would replace Biden at some point. And you would think that if we were smart enough, we'd go, well, if they replace him with someone younger, then Trump's the old guy. But, we didn't do it. So they stuck with Trump. Well, you know what? The vibes change. And they can change quickly. So those were the vibes going into it. By June 27th, we have the now infamous debate where, frankly, the media and Democrats trying to lie to us about Biden's abilities weren't working. But that's the moment when it became painfully obvious they could no longer even pretend that it was working. And so the vibes totally shifted. Trump had an amazing 3 weeks after that, vibe-wise. He has that debate. For the next 2 weeks, no one even mentions Trump anymore. It's just all negative vibes against Biden, which benefit Trump. Honestly, the best that Trump could hope for is to stay out of the news because he's his own worst enemy. And to be fair, no one was looking at him for like 2 weeks. And he did listen to his campaigners and they said, hey, we need to just lay low for a second and let the media go nuts on Biden and we'll show back up later. We don't need to go do a rally the next day. And he listened to them. It seems like the vibes shifted to Trump winning. And then he almost gets assassinated, bumps even more. He has a unified convention. The first 30 minutes of which his speech is actually pretty good. And then he goes into his normal Trump thing, but most people probably aren't watching. And so after that convention, I would say all the vibes are on Trump's side. All of it. None of it's on Biden's side. Not even just Biden's side, but the Democrats, because it looks like turmoil. They're trying to get rid of him. He's not stepping down. But everything changes again when Biden steps away from the race. Now the vibe is, this is exciting. It's an excitement vibe. We're going to get someone other than the two people that we really, really didn't like, that more than 60% of the country didn't like Biden. We're going to get someone new. That's an excitement vibe. It has nothing to do with who that person is at all. It happens to end up being Kamala Harris. And she's a fresh face. And honestly, she benefits from the vibes of not being Trump or Biden. It doesn't actually matter. Nothing else matters. And this is where I was wrong. What I was wrong about is things either matter or they don't. And what I've realized is there's two subcategories there. There are things that shouldn't matter, but do. And there are things that should matter, but don't. And what I confuse it for is I say, this should matter, and therefore it matters, and I'm going to talk about it. But the truth is, what I think should matter, and frankly, what our system of government is set up to say matters, just frankly does not to the current electorate. Voters in America do not right now care about policy. They do not care about practicality. They don't care about ideas. They don't care about principles. They care about a feeling. Now, some are going to say, okay, is this a chicken and egg situation? Like, which came first? Did the electorate stop caring about policy, and so therefore politicians stopped talking about policy because the electorate didn't care anymore? So it's just kind of like a snake eating its own tail. That's a lot of metaphors in one sentence. But or is it the opposite? Did politics become about like a team sport, and so people stopped caring about policy because it would be inconvenient for them and their team? I don't know. That's a good question. We'd have to dive way deeper into it. But that's where I've got things wrong, is that I've thought, they won't pick Kamala Harris. She's a terrible candidate. She ran in 4th place in the polls in her home state the last time she ran for president. And she ran so far to the progressive left that she dropped out weeks before the Iowa caucus. She never even made it to a primary. She was such a bad candidate. And, we have all, her word salads are bad. She thinks she's wiser than she is. She has high staff turnover. There's all these things on a list that I just go they're not going to, they know they can't pick Kamala. They don't want to. I thought the only reason they would pick Kamala is because they kind of had to. We can't just kick, she's the vice president. We can't just boot her to the side and have someone else. And it worked out pretty well in her favor that the Democrats really didn't want to have a fight about this. They wanted to have a unity vibe. And so they just basically all rallied around her. No one ran against her in this primary. So we don't want to get an open convention. She's basically coronated the day after, which I talked about in the last couple episodes, because the vibe that Democrats wanted to go for was unity. They skipped over all the stuff about her being a bad candidate, her obvious need to moderate from her positions that she had in 2019. Again, talked about that last week. I don't need to rehash all of that again, but she's very, very progressive, and everyone has to moderate to get in the general election. But the thing is, we've just decided, both parties have done this now, it's better to have unity in our base and look like we're one big happy family and hope that someone holds their nose and votes for us. That's really their only attempt to get voters in the middle. And by in the middle, I mean just not craven, idolizing these two people. Kamala Harris is a bad politician, and I've seen everyone pretending that she's amazing, that she's like got a Barack Obama or Bill Clinton level of political talent when she doesn't. It's hopeful, wishful thinking. It's vibes. It's optimism. It's not practicality. And Trump is doing this exact same thing too. Trump does not, care about policies. He's not even trying to hit Kamala Harris on those bad progressive policy. Instead, he's out there talking about like, well, she's pretending to be black. She is half black. She's biracial. This is not a complicated thing to comprehend. She's half Indian. She's half Jamaican. She's half black. She's half Indian. She's going to identify with both those aspects of her identity without necessarily having to embrace them both at the same time. I'm sure when she's with her mom's side of the family, it's more Indian culture. And when she's with her dad's side of the family, it's more Jamaican. Okay? That's okay. This is literally 20% of marriages now in the US are interracial, which means you're going to have more and more biracial kids. This is a normal part of being biracial. You can identify with both. But that's what Trump goes after because he doesn't care about policy. He has no real ideals. And so he's going after the vibe of someone pretending to be something she's not. And the truth is, it might work. I think it's really foolish because it's like, well, look at all these things you could go after her for. But maybe the vibe is that people are more turned off by someone being inauthentic, which goes with my theory. And if people perceive Kamala Harris as being inauthentic, maybe that works. And this goes back to Trump's VP pick. It was a vibe. He chose to go with J.D. Vance because he thought he had it sewed up. He was riding that wave. Everything looked great for him. It looked like he was going to sail to the nomination, even though it was quite obviously possible that Biden would drop out and they'd have to replace him with someone else. So to run against Biden, completely kind of foolish. They obviously tried to steer that ship a little bit during the convention to say, okay, we're just talking about Democrats now so that if it becomes someone else, we can pivot. Problem is, you can't ride that vibe wave and not expect the other side to do the same thing when it changes. And so now Kamala Harris has a wind at her back because she's not Donald Trump or Joe Biden. And Trump went with J.D. Vance because it was like, well, let's just double down on this MAGA vibe and really impress my base. And now Kamala Harris has done the exact same thing. So that's the first vibe. We had the old vibe that's now shifted because Kamala Harris is running as someone younger and basically someone that's not Trump or Biden. That's really what it boils down to. There was this old sort of vibe, but it was also just, these are old in the sense that we just voted for these same two people in 2020. So we're just kind of sick of it. I do think Biden's age had to do with it. I don't think Trump's age has anything to do with his unpopularity. I don't see any evidence of that. So the second vibe now is this unity vibe that I was talking about with these picks. So Harris picks Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. And no one knew who this guy was 3 weeks ago, basically, outside of the state of Minnesota. He was in Congress for 12 years before he was governor. He's a two-term. He just I think he is a two-term governor in Minnesota. And I certainly think picking him gives Republicans ammunition regarding he has a much more progressive record than, for example, Josh Shapiro as the governor of Pennsylvania would have been a pick. And so, I mean, he is pretty progressive when you look at his record as governor. He admitted to it being an abject failure to properly respond to the Black Lives Matter riots in 2020. Famously waited 3 days to call the National Guard. That was a full day after it was requested. In Minneapolis, he had several high-profile government fraud and waste scandals. He's signed a bill protecting minors coming to the state for gender transitions. He's allowed undocumented immigrants to get driver's license. He believes it signed a bill for a right to abortion right up till the moment of birth. It doesn't allow for any exceptions whatsoever to that. Right up to the moment of birth. And he and Democrats fought Republicans on an attempt to ban them in the third trimester outside of the life of the mother being in danger. This was the one-seat majority in the Minnesota House. Okay. So it's not like he got super majorities or something. This is people getting a little bit of a majority and then going all in on the progressive thing. And so, yeah, he's really progressive. Kamala Harris chose to go with someone that would not, again, unity. She doesn't want to appear there's any fighting in the middle. Because here's the truth about both parties right now. Trump and MAGA and Harris and the progressive wing of the Democrats, both candidates are caving. I don't want to call it caving, because what Donald Trump's doing is, I mean, he is that part of it. But especially with Harris, it appears that she and Democrats are more interested in not having it look like there's any problems among Democrats. And the truth is, the progressives are much more vocal and loud when they're upset than the people in the moderate middle of the Democratic Party are. So the progressives are the ones that are, embracing people that are saying, like, we support Hamas, and they're embracing the protesters that are, specifically anti-Semitic. And the Democrats basically don't want to have that fight about the anti-Semitism within their own party. And so that's at least part of the reason she picked him. Now, we don't know. She could have not picked Josh Shapiro because maybe she met him, maybe they didn't get along. There's all sorts of good reasons maybe to not pick him. But on paper, the governor of Minnesota does not help you win the states you need to win as much as the popular governor of Pennsylvania, a state you have to win if you're Kamala Harris. You have to. She cannot be the president unless she wins Pennsylvania. And I would just think the governor of that state, who's very popular, has like a 60% rating or favorability rating right now, or approval, that person I think would have helped her more. Now, she may have lost some of the progressive part of the base that is frankly anti-Semitic because of his views on those protests. And by the way, this is someone that supports Israel, but does not have kind words for Netanyahu. Really, I don't see a lot of daylight between Tim Walz's opinions and Josh Shapiro's. And yet, they wanted the unity vibe, and they wanted the let's turn out the base vibe, which is essentially just, do we think this guy puts off the right energy? And they think he's folksy, and they think he says things well. And to be fair, I read a thing. He really is the first vice presidential candidate that was picked by TikTok. The history of this is he went on some cable news show. He was the first person that said Republicans are weird, and Democrats have ran with that. There's no way you have escaped not hearing that Republicans are weird. And now there's this whole culture war fight between the right and the left about who's weirder. That's what this election has turned into. Our politics is basically each side calling the other one weird. That's it. And to be fair, Democrats needed to change something, because this whole Trump's a convicted felon and he's corrupt and he'll be the end of democracy was not working for them. So they're trying this weird thing out. And he basically coined the weird thing, and it basically blew up on TikTok, and therefore they went with him. It's foolish. The vibes on TikTok or all social media are super pro Kamala Harris right now. There's no doubt about it. She is riding that wave. I think the foolish thing is for her to think that can last forever. All it takes is her going a little too far, embracing the meme culture, and it turns into something that seems fabricated, and young people will tune out like that and move on to something else. The second it feels coerced or coordinated, it's going to feel cringy to them, and they're going to be off that train potentially. Now, maybe not enough to change the votes, but my point is all of this is just so silly. TikTok shouldn't matter, but unfortunately it does. Most young people are getting their news exclusively from TikTok. And the news right now on TikTok is just, it's kind of embracing that Kamala Harris is, she's kind of silly. She sticks her foot in her mouth. But you know what? She's exciting because she's not Trump. That's essentially, there's no policy. We're not talking about policies. We're not talking about, okay, where is she moderating? Where is she not? How would she differ from Biden? How would she differ from Trump policy-wise? We're not really talking about any of that stuff. And while I think that stuff should matter, it doesn't, unfortunately. And so that might be stuff that I want to talk about, but it doesn't matter to the general election in this country right now. Now, that doesn't mean it can't matter to you. I think that this is the stuff that should matter in politics. I think that people's policies and ideals and flip-flopping should matter. It just unfortunately doesn't right now. So if you care about those things, you're definitely in a minority. I'm definitely part of that minority. I care about these things, and it's just clear that no one does. So here's Nate Silver talking about the choice. He says, This was a choice designed to maintain the social fabric of the Democratic Party and avoid news cycles about a disappointed left and Democrats' internal squabbling over the war in Gaza. Or at least that's what I think it was. And I think he's right. Nate Silver, if you don't know, he created 538. He's really good at this modeling stuff, which, by the way, his models now show Harris having a slight edge. Entirely based on the three vibes we talked about. First vibe being we don't like Trump, we don't like Biden. It's vibe number one. So if you change out one of those two people, now you've got new blood and it's new and exciting. That's now the vibe. And this whole election has changed because of those two feelings. It doesn't have anything to do with anything else. Doesn't matter that Trump nearly got assassinated. It doesn't matter that the Republican convention went off without a hitch and looked unified. It does not matter that Harris doubled down on a super progressive VP candidate and she's just going to go all in on the progressive thing instead of trying to expand the Democratic coalition. None of that matters. It's just the vibes. This really all boiled down to Josh Shapiro's Jewish, and Democrats out loud were saying that could be a problem because of their base. Frankly, that did not happen when Donald Trump was when Tim Scott was in the running for VP. I didn't hear any Republican person on TV. By the way, these are things I was watching on CNN. No one was going, well, his blackness could be a problem with Republicans. I didn't see that happen. And Republicans get labeled as the racist party all the time. But I saw Democrats on CNN talking about, Josh Shapiro's the Jew thing might be a problem. Van Jones did it. John King said it. They're not even dancing around it. They know they've got an anti-Semitic problem on their base, and they're just willing to capitulate to them so that they appear to be unified. And like I said, maybe that's unfair. Maybe Harris just had better chemistry with Walz for all we know, or maybe she thinks he'll be a better campaigner. But here's the really crazy thing. I have read multiple stories. Now, to be fair, on the Democrat side, this is just opinions that I saw on things like Instagram or Twitter, things like that, okay? But I've seen the conspiracy theory from both sides that this was the smart pick because if you picked the other guy, and by the other guy on Trump's side, I mean Doug Burnham, and by the other guy on this side, I mean Josh Shapiro, the conspiracy nuts and the vibes on that side are that, well, you pick the person that's like meets your base and is like basically as close to you as possible. You don't moderate by trying to pick someone that's like more Midwestern or more moderate than you, or a governor, for example. All that doesn't matter. What matters is they are basically the same as you so that you don't get assassinated and they replace you as president. That's a real thing. That is allegedly why Trump, I mean, of course, keep in mind, these are people that I trust and have never lied to me in print before, but have said they heard that one of the reasons Trump picked J.D. Vance was that Tucker Carlson told him, if you pick a traditional Reaganite Republican, like a sort of neocon like Doug Burnham, they will assassinate you so that he can be the president instead. They being, I guess, the deep state or whatever. And I've seen the exact same excuse for picking Tim Walz over Josh Shapiro. They were like, if you pick Josh Shapiro, Harris will get assassinated so that he can be president. That is so crazy that that's how we are choosing candidates potentially. Now, I'm not saying that that's the reasoning behind Kamala Harris's, but I've seen people online say that. And I think what all of this boils down to is that online is not the real world. Kamala Harris and Democrats are wrong. TikTok is not the real world. It may be a big chunk of the young part of their base's real world, but the truth is it's not even ubiquitous among that voter demographic. And both campaigns are way too online. This is why I'm not on Twitter anymore, because it puts you into a bubble that you think that the things you see that happen on there, the outrage you see on there, the cancellations you see on there, that all of that really expands to real life. And it just does not, especially for the people that they have to get to win. Most people are in one of two camps right now. They either love and adore Donald Trump and will vote for him no matter what. That's his floor. He will always have that base. And the same thing goes with Kamala. There's some people that are going to feel like that with her too. or they hate the other guy so much that they will hold their nose and vote for the guy that's closer to them. So that's going to happen with everyone that has Trump derangement syndrome and is just like, super scared that he's going to end democracy. They will vote for whoever the Democrat is. It doesn't matter. But then there's some people in the middle that are persuadable and apparently not paying that much attention. And those are people that Kamala Harris or Donald Trump have to get those people to win. They do have to persuade some people. Donald Trump has to win some states he did not win in 2020 if he wants to win in 2024. And Kamala Harris has to at least win those states that Biden did, or she's not going to. To get into the nerdy stuff, she either has to win Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, all three of those, if she doesn't win Arizona or Georgia, which both look pretty red at this point. She has to win those states. So again, I would have picked Josh Shapiro. And every writer and every political smart person I know said, yeah, Shapiro's the smart pick. Democrats and Republicans. This is across the board. But she didn't go with it. Because I think maybe, I keep saying she's a bad candidate, but maybe they understand that none of the things that we think matter really matter because the American people, frankly, don't care about them. It's hard to have principles or ideas on either side right now because the candidate that we're supporting can so quickly abandon them. It's hard to have policy ideas or ideals, I guess, rather, with Trump because he can change his mind immediately and he demands that you always agree with him. So you're either flip-flopping all the time. And so most people have just hedged on, I'm not going to take a policy position. I'm not going to have conservative ideals. I'm not going to have principles. And it's happening on the left too. Most Democrats are pro-Israel in this conflict. They think that Hamas is our terrorist. This is the majority of the country by a long shot. Like 70% of the country thinks that. And yet, the Democrats are pandering to a part of their base that is not just, hey, like, you can be critical of Israel. They are specifically pro-Hamas and anti-Semitic. There's a huge difference between calling something out that Israel does poorly, which is totally viable, totally normal thing that you can do, and saying they shouldn't exist and that we should wipe Jews off the face of the planet. Because that's what Hamas wants. That's what Iran wants. That's what Hezbollah wants. They want to eliminate Jews everywhere. And there's some people in the Democratic Party that are siding with those people. They think they're right. And Democrats are happy to capitulate to it if they think it will win. So what's the next vibe? What do we think happens next? I don't believe for a second that right now, what is it, August 7th? I don't believe that nothing will change between now and November. We've got 3 months, and I don't believe that we will just ride this exact vibe wave for the rest of the time. But as mentioned prior, I'm not going to try to predict what it will be necessarily. But these vibes allow us to believe things are true because we feel they are, and it's not based on any sort of facts. Therefore, those feelings can change very quickly. Kamala Harris has the benefit of not being Trump or Biden, and that might be enough to win the election, but it might not if people end up not vibing with her. And that could be for all sorts of reasons. It could be because they think she's a phony. It could be because she hides and tries not to do any interviews or press conferences between now and then. People might be like, I'm getting a vibe that she's not being honest with us. And that might be enough to sink her. Going back to those polls about how unpopular Biden and Trump were, for Republican primary voters to double down on Trump when they knew he was so widely unpopular, when people like Nikki Haley, frankly, would have walloped Biden or anyone else that the Democrats picked, I think it was foolish. And for Democrats to not get rid of Biden earlier themselves, same problem. They were both going with feelings instead of looking at the data. But maybe that's okay now. I mean, that's the thing is like, I would have called that foolish, but it is going to work out for one of these two campaigns. I think the lesson they'll learn, unfortunately, is that works. You can just go based on vibes. But I think what they're not discounting is that maybe the negative vibes of the other person is what drives the win for you. It's not necessarily that you did anything right. It's that the other people did something wrong. And I think we're just at a point where we're saying, next, please. and then judging someone on the job of being the president instead of in the interview process that the primaries and the election should be and would make sense. We've essentially done that 3 times now. I think 2016 Trump was please, we want someone else. We do not want a Clinton. We're tired of this stuff. Let's make a change. Trump was not that change. I don't think that people wanted, or maybe he was too much of a change. Either way, people did not like Trump by the end of it. And they said, give us someone else. Give us, and Biden it was. And Biden's only mandate was that he not be Trump. He took that to mean something else. He thought it meant he was FDR, and he tried to do a bunch of stuff that, again, made people unhappy. And now they're going, okay, yeah, we want someone else. And when Trump's the other option, they go like, we don't really like either one of these guys. And so voters keep being disappointed. And I believe this is because they are promised one thing. They're promised change, be that from Obama, be that from Trump. Sometimes it's explicitly in policy form. Sometimes it's just more of an unrealistic expectations. And to me, that's what we're heading for in 2024. I think that there are unrealistic expectations in both the bases and in the general electorate that like, oh, the president can make my life better. The president's going to fix the economy. The president's going to make gas prices be lower. The truth is the president can't do a lot of this stuff. And we will keep being disappointed when they don't do the things that they can't possibly do. But they keep promising it. They keep raising these unrealistic expectations, and then they just don't deliver on it. And so people just go next. So sort of, people have asked me, so what now? Who are you voting for? Would you vote for Kamala Harris over Donald Trump? Kamala Harris is the reason I didn't vote for Biden in 2020. Didn't like Biden. I thought he's too old. And I thought picking someone as bad at the job as I thought Harris would be, to me proved he was not taking it seriously. And VPs truly don't really matter. But what they do matter is showing the person on the top of the ticket what their mental state is. So the reason I don't trust Biden is because he chose to pick Kamala Harris mostly because she was a black woman. And by the way, let's go back to Trump's thing. I don't remember anyone saying she wasn't black in 2020. This is just a new thing. It's a new thing that Trump's trying out. No one disputed her blackness in 2020. And I think that was foolish because what I think that proved is that Joe Biden was more interested on the pat of the back of, frankly, progressive white people that want to feel good about like, oh, look, we gave whatever, instead of taking it seriously. And I think Kamala Harris is doing the same thing right now with an old white guy. It's not necessarily a race problem. It's that she goes, I'd rather double down on the progressiveness and not have the progressives mad at me. I don't think Kamala Harris is anti-Semitic, by the way. She's married to a Jewish guy. So I frankly don't believe that she's actually anti-Semitic. But I think she let the anti-Semitism on the left guide her decision to pick Tim Walz instead. And that's what disappoints me is that I go, gosh, Trump could try to expand his coalition and pick someone else, but he's going to pick J.D. Vance instead. Kamala Harris could expand her coalition. She could actually have a good moment here where she kind of repudiates the bad part of her base, as, by the way, everyone would expect Republicans to do. I expect everyone to do. I think it's very easy to say, you are racist, and if I require your vote to win, then I don't care to win. Like, I don't want the support of racist people. That's what a good leader would do, but no one's doing that because they'd rather have the unity vibe. This is just dumb because most Americans are not wildly progressive and they're not wildly MAGA. Both of these people have very low floors of fanatic people following them. Most people are just holding their nose and voting for the lesser of two evils in this. People voted for Biden because they didn't like Trump. People are going to vote for Trump this time because they don't like Democrats, Biden, Kamala, all those people. That's most of the people that are going to vote, especially the people that they need to win over. I just think we need more pragmatic presidential candidates. I'm not saying they have to be perfect. I don't expect anyone to be perfect. I don't ever expect to run a flag up my car for a presidential candidate. I think it's weird. But I would like someone that's honest. I appreciated that Nikki Haley in the primary, it's not popular to say, but she got on stage during those primaries and said, look, I'm pro-life. I don't want abortion to happen, but I'm also realistic and know that we don't have 60 votes in the Senate. And so I'm not going to get up here and pretend that I can accomplish things that we can't unless we have that kind of majority in the Senate where we can pass these kind of things. It's frankly not possible right now. That's pragmatic. Doesn't mean she's not pro-life. It just means she's going, look, we do not have the votes to get that done. We do not have Americans on our side. We need to persuade people. But no one's trying to persuade anyone on any policy stuff. And like I said, is that the politicians that are driving us to not care about policy? Or is it our lack of care for policy that's driving them to also not care about it? I don't know the answer to that. But I wish someone would come in and go for that 60-40 issue or that 70-30 issue that I think people do care about. And I think you've got to lead people. And frankly, Kamala Harris is not a leader. Donald Trump is not a leader. Because they just demand people get in line. If they tried, they could persuade. This is what I really want. I would like to move beyond this base politics and fear-mongering. I don't think base politics is a good way to govern. It's just not. It goes back to primaries being the problem. Basically, candidates are scared of being primaried. They're not scared of losing in the general election when we're talking about Congress. Most of their seats are very safe because they're in safe districts or they are in safe states that are solidly red or solidly blue. And so they're only worried about someone coming from the right or the left of them, on the right, on the Republican side, on the left, on the Democrats, that will primary them. And that is basically leaked into the general election now constantly because it's just about, they're scared to say anything that would maybe upset that base. And it's not going to get better. There's nothing that says this is going to get better. Maybe my only hope, if you want to get into some wish casting, is that if Kamala Harris wins, I would love if Republicans controlled the House and the Senate so she couldn't actually do any of her crazy progressive ideas that she has, because they're very, very bad ideas, I think. We'll talk more about those in depth in the coming weeks. But I would hope that a Donald Trump loss would get the Republicans to go, you know what? We've tried this. You've lost us several elections in a row. You basically lost us in 2018, 2020, 2022, 2024. It's time to dump the MAGA stuff. It's time for some accountability. Of course, they won't take that probably because they'll just say the election was stolen. That's the ace in the hole there. They don't ever have to be, they don't ever have to be culpable for those losses because they just blame it on stolen election stuff. And Democrats are doing this too. Don't get me wrong. They do it too. Stacey Abrams is still trying to claim she didn't lose her gubernatorial race in Georgia. It's ridiculous, but it's happening. And I just think that would be my only hope, is that if you lose to someone as bad a candidate as Kamala Harris because they managed to run a TikTok campaign, then I would hope that we just burn it all down and let's start from scratch. Let's get rid of Trump. Let's get rid of MAGA. Let's get rid of all that kind of populism stuff that didn't work for election after election after election. And let's do something that works. I'm not optimistic that they'll do that, because at every point that the parties have a chance to do the right thing, they have not taken it. We are running on vibes now. So I appreciate you paying attention, because I will continue to talk about things that I think should matter, even if they don't. So even if I'm wrong about them actually mattering, I'm still going to talk about the things that I think should matter to voters, should matter to you, issues that should matter to all of us because they affect our daily lives. Those are the things I want to talk about, even if politicians don't want to. So that is all for this episode of The Homeless Conservative. I know your time is valuable, and so I'm grateful that you chose to spend some of it with me. If you enjoyed the show, the one thing that would really, really help me is you could just like it or subscribe to it or rate it wherever you watch or listen, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple, all of them are good. That helps me out a ton, and I will catch you next time.